I want you to close your eyes for a moment and try to get your head around an unimaginably large number, $6.6 trillion. That's the number 66, followed by 11 zeros. That's the total amount of money that flows through global foreign exchange markets every day, according to the Bank of International Settlements. If we divided that money equally, every person on the planet would have $825 per day, equivalent to an annual income of about $300,000. And by way of comparison, the total value of global trade, which includes the trade in goods and services between countries, was approximately $25 trillion in 2022. This means that about every 4 days, the amount of money moving through global foreign exchange markets, currencies being bought and sold for other currencies, exceeds the total annual value of global trade. What is all that money being used for? That's the story of the financialization of the food system that we'll explore in this video. Let's start with the basics. In general terms, financialization refers to the increasing role played by financial markets, institutions, and actors in the functioning of the economy. Or as Greta Kipner describes it in The Financialization of the American Economy, financialization refers to a pattern of accumulation in which profit-taking occurs increasingly through financial channels rather than through trade or commodity production. In the context of food, it highlights the increasing influence and involvement of financial markets, institutions, and actors in the production, distribution, and pricing of food. Financialization involves the integration of financial instruments and practices into the agricultural sector, leading to a shift where financial motives and market mechanisms, rather than traditional mechanisms of supply and demand, or even more broadly of custom and social obligation, play a critical role in determining the dynamics of food systems. It means that financial activities and actors have gained significant influence over how food is produced, traded, and consumed. This shift goes beyond simply financing agricultural activities. It involves the growing dominance of financial logic and speculation in decision-making throughout the food chain. This process of financialization operates through a variety of channels. A futures contract is a standardized agreement to buy or sell an underlying asset, like a commodity, currency, or stock index, at a predetermined price on a specified future date. Futures contracts are primarily used for hedging against risk or for price discovery. They allow producers, consumers, and traders to lock in prices for future transactions, thus protecting themselves from adverse price fluctuations. Both the buyer and the seller have an obligation to fulfill the contract at expiration. Futures contracts are typically settled by delivering the underlying asset, although cash settlements are also possible. Historically, such contracts were common in the U.S. farm system, with farmers often locking in prices early in the growing season for delivery after harvesting, protecting themselves from potential price declines. An option is a financial contract that gives the buyer the right, but not the obligation, to buy, also known as a call option, or to sell, known as a put option, an underlying asset like stocks, commodities, or currencies, at a predetermined price, which is called the strike price, on or before a specific date, the expiration date. Options are used for hedging and speculation. They offer flexibility and allow the buyer to limit potential losses while also maintaining the potential for gains. Under the terms of the option contract, the seller, called the writer, of the option is only obligated to fulfill the contract if the buyer exercises their right. Options can be exercised, resulting in the delivery of the underlying asset, or they can expire worthless if not exercised by the option date. Option contracts are often used by investors who purchase call options on a stock they believe will increase in value, giving them the right to buy the stock at a lower price if their prediction is correct. Finally, a swap is a customized agreement between two parties to exchange cash flows or values of different financial instruments over a specific period. Common types include interest rate swaps, which exchange fixed for floating interest rates, and commodity swaps, which exchange a fixed price for a floating price of a commodity. Swaps are primarily used for hedging and managing risk exposure to interest rates, exchange rates, or commodity prices. Under a swap, both parties are obligated to make the agreed-upon payments through the lifetime of the contract, and swaps are typically settled through a series of cash flows exchanged between the parties. An example of a swap contract might be a company with a floating rate loan entering into an interest rate swap to exchange their floating rate for a fixed rate, thus protecting themselves from rising interest rates. Swaps, options, and futures are all grouped under the broad category of derivatives, and all three can be used for both hedging and speculation. Hedging is a risk management strategy normally used to offset potential losses in one investment by making another investment. The primary goal is to reduce or eliminate the risk associated with price fluctuations of an asset. For example, farmers might hedge against the risk of falling crop prices by selling futures contracts, while companies that use agricultural products as inputs might hedge against rising prices by buying futures contracts. Speculation, on the other hand, involves taking on financial risk with the expectation of making a profit from price movements. Unlike hedging, speculation does not involve ownership of the underlying asset, but is purely aimed at profiting from market volatility. Whereas hedging is largely a defensive strategy intended to minimize risk and protect against price volatility, speculation is more an offensive strategy that involves taking advantage of price volatility for financial gain. Originally, these kinds of contracts were primarily designed to help farmers and buyers hedge against price volatility and mitigate risk, allowing them to plan on specific sale prices after harvest and therefore allowing them to plan for the season. An example might help clarify this. Let's say you're a coffee farmer and you're worried that coffee prices might fall. You could enter the futures market and sell your coffee forward, meaning that you've agreed to sell your harvest at a predetermined price before you've even harvested it. You're basically locking in a price now, and in doing so, you might be able to get a higher price and thus a higher income than if you waited to sell it at harvest. And from the purchaser's perspective, they're able to lock in delivery of a specific commodity at a price in the future, ensuring stable supply. This is why historically, grain mills and other food processors bought futures contracts from farmers. For the contract to work, you need both sides, a farmer selling a future delivery and a buyer agreeing to purchase it. What the futures exchange markets do is to connect those two ends, an investor who thinks the price will increase and an investor on the other side who thinks that the prices will fall. When the contract clears, one party will pay the other depending upon what the outcome, the final price, actually is. But increasingly, those contracts are bought and sold any number of times by any number of investors, most of whom have no real interest in the underlying commodity before the final due date. So let's say that the investor who bought our coffee farmer's future contracts agreed to purchase 10,000 pounds of coffee for $2 per pound in 1 year's time. That futures contract would have a value of $20,000. But now suppose that some unexpected event, say a drought in Vietnam or labor unrest in Brazil, caused a decline in coffee production, forcing prices up to $2.50 a pound. The contract held by the investor still allows them to purchase 10,000 pounds of coffee for $2 a pound, even though the coffee is now selling for $2.50 a pound. As a result, the contract is now worth $25,000, and the person holding the contract stands to make $5,000 in profit. They can then sell the contract on to another investor, realizing their profit and transferring the right to buy that coffee for $2 a pound at the contract price. Those holding such contracts with no real interest in the underlying commodities they represent are usually called index investors. But there are several issues. First, the market is not necessarily efficient when it comes to price determination, especially as large institutional investors and speculators have flooded into the market. Prices have become distorted. As a result, the markets may not operate effectively as a hedge against risk as they historically had been intended to do. Second, the markets themselves may not include the farmers. Small farmers, especially in the global south, may not be able to access the market, or the crops they're growing may not be included in derivatives markets. And third, the markets themselves are becoming increasingly concentrated, even as the number of participants in markets increases. That is to say, the exchanges and clearinghouses that facilitate the trade, making sure that the credit operates and risk is managed on the exchanges, are becoming more concentrated. But what's the point of this? What role do such contracts serve? From the perspective of the farmer, futures serve as a hedge against risk, locking in a guaranteed price regardless of future conditions. Essentially, derivatives markets have replaced the historical role played by the state in agricultural markets, ensuring against crop loss, mitigating risk, and ensuring price stability. As governments have abdicated their historical role in guaranteeing floor prices, subsidizing production, ensuring market stability, and so on, all as part of the broad neoliberal project, derivatives markets have sought to fill that void. And in neoclassical economics, speculation through futures contracts increases the efficiency of resource allocation by allowing individuals to make decisions and allocate risks or costs across different contingent futures and the probability of each. If the futures markets function as intended, futures trades would be based on real changes in supply and demand conditions for the future commodity. Over time, such speculation would bring the contracted price into line with the real price, often called the spot price, of the underlying commodity determined by real-world non-financial factors. Sometimes this is referred to as the price discovery function of futures contracts. And finally, such investment also serves to increase liquidity in agricultural markets, ensuring sufficient funds are available to maintain production and investment. And this is the logic under which futures markets in food and agricultural commodities, and indeed across countless other commodities, have increasingly been deregulated. Unfortunately, though, such markets often fail to have the stabilizing and price discovery features they're supposed to have. There are a couple of reasons for this. First, perhaps counterintuitively, speculative investment has actually increased volatility in agricultural markets. Because speculators are often making trades based on short-term price trends and expectations rather than on fundamental supply and demand factors, their decisions tend to amplify price swings both upwards and downwards. Such increased volatility makes it difficult for farmers to plan their production and for consumers to budget for food. It can also lead to sudden price spikes, making food unaffordable for vulnerable populations. The rapid influx of investors into food and agricultural commodities after deregulation has also had an inflationary impact on food prices. In his testimony before Congress, hedge fund manager Michael Masters estimated that in April 2008, speculators, traders who were investing in commodities markets with the objective of making profits on price movements rather than on having direct interests in the physical commodity, held the majority of all futures contracts for every commodity he explored. In no area did physical hedgers, those with a direct interest in the production, processing, or consumption of a physical commodity, hold a majority of contracts. Indeed, according to Masters, speculators held 59% of corn futures contracts, 70% of soybeans futures, 83% of wheat futures, 87% of cattle futures, and 88% of pork futures in U.S. markets. This gave speculators an oversized impact in all major markets, far outstripping the influence held by traditional market hedgers. And because such speculative investors were often betting on higher prices, such trading actually created a disconnect between the actual supply and demand conditions in the physical market, driving prices higher without any underlying change in real-world market conditions. Price swings, in other words, came to be influenced more by the flow of speculative investment in and out of the market than by any changes in real supply and demand in the market of the underlying commodity. All of this has real impacts for farmers and consumers. For farmers, increased price volatility makes it challenging to predict their income and plan for the future, significantly increasing the financial risk of farming. And when speculative activities drive up commodity prices, those higher costs are passed on to the consumers, leading to increased food prices and potential food insecurity, especially in low-income regions of the world. Indeed, according to GLT Josh, Jennifer Clapp, and others, speculative investment in agricultural commodities played a critical role in the 2008 global food crisis, a topic we explore in greater detail in another video. In light of the potentially devastating impact that speculative investment can have on global food markets, there have been calls to expand regulation, reversing some of the movement towards liberalization that occurred in the early 2000s. Passed in the aftermath of the 2008 global food crisis, the Dodd-Frank Act sought to increase transparency by expanding reporting and oversight efforts, aiming to deter manipulative pricing practices and provide more accurate information to market participants, contributing to more stable prices. It also reintroduced position limits, which cap the number of contracts that a single trader or group of traders can hold, thereby preventing market manipulation and reducing excessive speculation. Similar efforts were made with European Union regulations, also aiming to curb excessive speculation and enhance price stability in global food markets. But critics argue that such efforts do not go far enough. They call for expanded global coordination and harmonization of investment regulations to prevent regulatory arbitrage, where traders exploit differences in regulations across jurisdictions. And still others call for a return to the pre-1970s regulatory frameworks that emphasize state marketing boards and governmental intervention to ensure price and market stability, while simultaneously limiting participation in the derivatives market to those with an immediate interest in the product itself. And so, while regulatory efforts have aimed to mitigate excessive speculation, the impact of financialization on food prices and market stability remains a crucial issue for policymakers and market participants. But that's it for now. Please leave any questions you have in the comments section below, and thanks for watching.